Well, joining me now from Westminster is GBNews presenter, and some might call him Mr Brexit, Nigel Farage. I certainly would call him Mr Brexit. Morning, Nigel. On a day like this, on this anniversary, do you wake up and think all of the victories we were hoping for have been achieved, or do you have a heart sink at the victories that we basically haven't had?
Well, look, I mean, what happened 3 years ago today was a very big moment. I mean, not just a big historic constitutional moment, but it marked the end of over 3 years of the most disgraceful period of modern democracy in Britain, where a national referendum and the attempt to stop it, and it went through large sections of politics and the media. This was the day 3 years ago that finally, the people's voice was respected. And I think it's absolutely right that we should be a self-governing democratic nation. We should chart our own course in the world. However, 3 years on, you have to say, the enormous opportunities, economic opportunities that we had from everything, from the fishing industry to financial services, we have not taken advantage of. Now, some will tell you that's because the government was preoccupied with COVID. I think the truth of it is the Conservative Party, who fought against it all the way, then landed us with a very bad deal. I mean, Boris Johnson told us it was oven ready. I mean, the oven wasn't even preheated, frankly. And I just don't think they ever really believed in it. In the end, they grabbed at it for electoral opportunity. So many of us, including me, feel very disappointed about the way in which the Conservatives have carried this out. And the big one, the really big one, is this. The reason the turnout in that referendum was about 10% higher than all the experts thought it would be. There was one piece of sovereignty that people really demanded was sorted out, and that was Britain's borders. And if you look today, levels of legal immigration are far higher than they were as European Union members, let alone the 45,000 people that crossed the English Channel in small dinghies last year. And I think people who voted Brexit to get back control of our borders have every right today, 3 years on, to feel betrayed by this government.
When you look at what both main parties are saying now, Nigel, with the Conservatives and also with Labour, their position on the EU, do you get the feeling that the message that they are sending about how they would handle the relationship with Europe going forward is what you would want to hear from either of them?
Well, I think the message that we're getting from the government is that a deal is close on Northern Ireland, which will mean, I'm almost certain, that constitutionally Ireland will just not be fully part of the United Kingdom. And the message I get from David Lammy, particularly from Labour, is whilst he says on the one hand we will not rejoin the single market or the European Union, we'll rejoin virtually every other group, we'll align ourselves to their rules. So I think, assuming that Labour win the next election, which I think is a fairly good bet, we'll finish up with a full Brino, a full Brexit in name only. We will be independent, but our room for manoeuvre, if we mirror everything the EU does, will be very, very limited, and that will lead, down the path to some saying, well, look, if we're having to accept EU laws, maybe we should be in there having a say. So, look, I think, as I say, the Conservatives won a massive majority on the back of a Get Brexit Done slogan, having made a terrible mess of it for over 3 years. Boris Johnson's government had the world at their feet. They had the chance to bring opportunity and benefit to tens of millions of Britons, and they've dropped the ball.
We've got this awful news today about the state of the British economy, worse than expected, from the IMF. I did wonder whether that was just a coincidence that this news has come out today, but maybe that's just me being a little cynical about how the media might be playing this. There will be people today lining up. There are columnists all over the paper saying, well, this is because of Brexit. The state of our economy, we can lay this, frankly, at the door of Nigel Farage. What would you say to those people?
Well, surprisingly, given that the IMF is a globalist organisation that helped to organise bailouts of the euro when it was in trouble, despite all of that, the IMF report, which is, pretty grim, pretty bearish, doesn't put the blame at Brexit. It puts it firmly on British government policy. tax, very much at the top of the list, no attempt to deal with Britain's productivity problem, and as a direct result of this Conservative Party's policies, we're now seeing the first brain drain in Britain since the late 1970s, where our bright young entrepreneurs are heading off to Portugal, Italy and other parts of the world. That's got nothing to do with Brexit. That's about complete mismanagement of our economy, and it appears they haven't got the message. I mean, ironically, since Brexit, we've become even more of a European social model economy than we were before. And that was our choice made by our government, led from Downing Street.
We're running our Twitter poll this morning, Nigel, asking our viewers and listeners whether they would wish to leave or remain now. 80% at the moment say they would be happy still to leave, which is probably music to your ears. Just to give you an idea, though, one message has said, let me just put this to you. Katie on Twitter said that Brexit has destroyed the labour market, which is why the NHS and care service is short-staffed, hospitality is understaffed and transport too. Is our lack of a good workforce because of Brexit, Nigel?
Have you seen the immigration numbers? 1.2 million people settled in Britain last year. 1.2 million. There are numbers coming into Britain from all around the world, the likes of which we have never, ever seen before. The biggest problem in our labour market, oh, and by the way, there are labour market shortages in Australia and America as well. The biggest problem in our labour market is we have too many people of working age who now choose not to work. That is a deep cultural problem allied to the welfare state, nothing to do with Brexit whatsoever. You know, this idea that because of Brexit no one's coming into Britain, I'll remind you again, legal immigration is now the highest into this country it's been in the history of our nation.
It is remarkable when you think about that. It is mind-blowing. Nigel, you and I were both working at the same media outlet when the referendum was held. And I remember talking to public every week, as you were. And all of the kind of the sort of establishment members, the establishment media that I spoke to were absolutely convinced that Brexit was never going to happen. But when you were talking to real people, phoning in a radio show, I would come off air every week and I would say categorically, we're leaving. We're leaving. There's no doubt. When you look back on that result, for me, part of it is one of the biggest occasions in history where those at the top of the elite of power, the establishment, had so little understanding of how the man on the street actually felt. Is that how you see it now with the passage of time?
Oh, yes. I mean, Brexit was a grassroots revolution. Yeah. Nobody wanted it. None of the political parties wanted it. And actually, until the last couple of years, none of the newspapers even wanted it either, let alone the trade unions and business organisations. This was a grassroots revolution. And really, it was the rise of UKIP that put the fear of God into the establishment. That's what made Cameron promise a referendum if he won a majority. And even when we got to polling day, June 23rd, 2016, still those inside the London Westminster bubble did not understand what was happening in the country. And the real hope was that what Brexit would give us was a new kind of politics. And actually, truth of it is, in London, nothing has changed at all. And I think those disconnects on policy between London and the rest, I think they're still there today on immigration, net zero and many other things.
Give me an optimistic last line, Nigel. What do we have to look forward to in terms of the freedoms from not being within the EU? Let's find some reason to be cheerful.
Well, years ago, when UKIP was first setting up, I found myself, and I'd been a Conservative supporter, I found myself with somebody who'd been very much on the left of the Labour Party, a Bennite. And so we both agreed that we should leave the EU and be a self-governing nation, but we disagreed about how it should be governed. So we reached a compromise, which was by leaving the EU, we'd regain our birthright to mismanage our own country. And I can tell you, the Conservatives are doing that incredibly well. It's up to us now. It's up to us now. You know, we can vote for governments that do things well or do things badly. As members of the EU, there was very little we could do to change law that was put upon us by a majority of EU states. It's up to us. We're in charge of our own future, and we ought to make a rather better job of it.